Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and politics. We're broadcast on KGPT Channel 26 and its companion website, kgbt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. I mostly cover Wichita, Sedgwick County, and Kansas, although with some of the national events taking place, it's hard sometimes to keep a focus on local events. I try to cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other television or radio stations, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, as these are the things that are important, and these are the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it federal, state, or local. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send a couple times a week there. And if you want to contact me, you can find my email address and telephone number there, or it's easy to remember, bob.weeks@gmail.com. Well, a recent Kansas City Star editorial made the case for higher school spending in Kansas, but it's based on a premise that doesn't exist in real life. In its conclusion, the editorial stated, Kansans have always known that rigorous standards and strong, well-funded public school systems are the best routes to an educated workforce. Well, the problem is that Kansas does not have rigorous standards for its schools. If the Star editorial writers had asked the National Center for Education Statistics about Kansas school standards, well, that agency might have referred the editorial writers to the most recent version of a report called Mapping State Proficiency Standards onto the NAEP Scales. Well, NCES, they're the primary federal entity for collecting and analyzing data related to education in the U.S. and other nations, located within the United States Department of Education. Now, this mapping project establishes a relationship between the test that each state like Kansas gives to assess its students and the NAEP test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, a test that's the same in all states. And the conclusion of NCES is that Kansas school standards are relatively low compared to other states. Here's the results of this study for grade 4 reading that you can see on your screen now. States to the left have weak standards, and states to the right have high standards. And look at where Kansas is. There's only a handful of states with weaker standards than Kansas. And here's another chart from the same analysis, but for grade 4 math. Kansas ranks a little bit better, but there are still many more states with higher standards than Kansas. And the NCES study also found that Kansas had weakened its already low standards. This happened right after the 2005 Kansas School Finance Court decision that ordered more spending on schools. But while that spending was rapidly rising, Kansas lowered its standards. And Kansas is not alone in weakening its standards during this period. It's also not alone in showing better performance on its state tests than the students show on national tests. States were under pressure to show increased scores, and some, Kansas included, weakened their state assessment standards in response. But what's important to know is that Kansas school leaders are not being honest with Kansans, and as we see, our state's newspapers are not helping. Here's something else from the Kansas City Star recently. That newspaper carried a story about Kansas jobs and unemployment. The claim was made that Kansas has lost more than 8,800 jobs this year. And Kansas Representative Paul Davis, he's a Democrat who said he'll run for governor next year, he linked to that article on his Facebook page and made a statement based upon the job loss claim, writing Kansas has lost nearly 9,000 jobs in 2013. Well, if we gather statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I did that, well, we see an increase in jobs, not a decrease. So what is going on here? Well, the numbers the Star reporter used are from something called the Current Population Survey. I use data from the Current Employment Statistics series of data. So, which is correct? Well, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which produces both of these series of data, it published a report which explained the two data series. It said, adjusted for major differences, the employment measures track rather well over time, but they have exhibited periodic trend discrepancies throughout their histories. Although many theories about the discrepancies have been put forth, complete explanations have never been found for any of the divergencies, despite a significant amount of research. At such times, data users and analysts would be well served not to think of one survey as right and the other as wrong, but to consider their statistical strengths and the distinct information that each provides and then weigh them accordingly. So there's two series of employment data, and with one data series showing job losses and another showing gains, what did the Kansas City Star do? Well, you guessed it. It chose to bash the governor for his record of creating jobs. But I ask you this, was this helpful in gaining an understanding of what's happening in the Kansas economy? By the way, the Wichita Eagle ran the same article. Well, we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Recently, the Wichita Eagle reported that the City of Wichita has increased its grants of property tax exemptions in recent years. But buried in the story is the really important aspect of public policy. In his reporting, Bill Wilson wrote, "The Eagle asked the city last week for an accounting of the jobs created over the past decade by the tax abatements, a research project that urban development director staffers have yet to complete. It will take us some time to pull together all the agenda reports on the 5-year reviews going back to 2003. That same research will also reveal any abatements that were retooled as a result of the 5-year reviews." That's City Urban Development Director Alan Bell. He also said, "I can tell you that none of the abatements were terminated." Well, when I read that, one might have thought that the city was keeping records on the number of jobs created on at least an annual basis for management purposes, and that city management would have these figures readily available for immediate review. But apparently, that is not the case. We need to recognize that because the city does not have these statistics about job creation at its immediate disposal, it is evident that the city is not managing this effort. Or maybe it just doesn't care. This is a management problem at the highest level. And in January earlier this year, when the City Council awarded City Manager Robert Layton a large raise, the praise from council members, every one, was effusive. This means one of several things. Perhaps the mayor and City Council have not asked for these job creation numbers. Because if you were a City Council member and you asked for the number of jobs that our economic development efforts have created, and the city manager said, "It'll take us some time to research this," well, would you be satisfied with that response? Would you have confidence that the city is managing its efforts carefully? Or maybe City Council members don't care about the numbers, or maybe they're not interested in knowing these numbers. And there could be other explanations, but all point to a lack of bureaucratic management and political oversight. And I also wondered this, why didn't city officials explain that, according to their analysis and way of thinking, why didn't they explain that these tax abatements don't have a cost? Because when these are presented to the City Council, each abatement opportunity is accompanied by a benefit cost analysis that purports to show that the city, county, school district, and state gain more in tax revenue than they forego from the tax abatement. Well, doesn't that extra government revenue create jobs? In any case, the number of jobs stemming from our economic development efforts is quite small. In his State of the City address for 2012, Wichita Mayor Coral Brewer said that the city's economic development efforts had created almost 1,000 jobs. Now, while that sounds like a lot of jobs, that number deserves some context. And according to estimates from the Kansas Department of Labor, the civilian labor force in the city of Wichita at that time was about 192,000 people, with about 178,000 people at work. This means that the 1,000 jobs that were created account for just about 0.5% of our city's workforce. This minuscule number is dwarfed by the normal ebb and flow of other economic activity. Oh, and this year in his 2013 address, the mayor didn't mention job creation numbers at all. And here's an example of property tax abatements granted for which the city received a little in return. In 2005, with great fanfare, the city announced that its economic development recruitment efforts had landed in Phonics, an operator of telephone call centers. The council agenda report for November 15, 2005 recommended that the council approve a letter of intent for tax abatements. The report stated this: the Greater Wichita Economic Development Coalition has worked with a national site consultant to recruit a new company to Wichita. As a result of the recruitment effort, Infonix will locate a large customer service center in the former MCI building and hire over 900 customer care representatives. As an economic development incentive, the city offered Infonix industrial revenue bonds and property tax abatements on equipment and furnishings subject to the city council approval. Well, the recommendation was to approve a 100% tax abatement for an initial 5-year period, plus an additional 5 years following city council review, and also to authorize an application for a sales tax exemption on everything purchased with the proceeds of the bonds. And in December of that year, 2005, the council approved the ordinance granting the tax abatements. Okay, now fast forward to February of 2011. The 5-year property tax abatement granted in 2005 was over, and the council could choose to extend it for another 5 years if the committed goals had been met. Now, the agenda report gave this summary for capital investment, which was to purchase furniture, fixtures, and equipment for a capital investment of $6 million. The company met that goal. For job creation, the 2005 commitment was create 944 new jobs in 5 years. And the results, what actually happened according to city documents, were created 870 new jobs, although the current job level is 185. So Infonix was short of its job creation commitments, but the city used a loophole to grant it a 1-year extension of the tax abatement program. And that 1-year extension was never the subject of further considerations, as during that year Infonix changed its name and in January 2012 closed the Wichita facility that was the subject of these incentives. Now, it's unfortunate for Wichita and the Infonix employees that the facility closed. The important public policy consideration is that we learn from this. So, when Wichita counts the number of jobs created through its economic development efforts, does it adjust for short-lived jobs like these? Well, the answer, I believe, is no. We don't adjust our job creation statistics, and we don't learn. In fact, we don't even keep current. GWEDC, that's the Greater Wichita Economic Development Coalition, credited with recruiting Infonix to Wichita. GWEDC doesn't update its website to reflect current conditions. Infonix closed its facility in Wichita in 2012, and as we saw above, city documents said that at its peak, the company employed 870 people in Wichita. But as of today, here's what GWEDC says on its webpage titled Office Operations. It says, Wichita hosts over a dozen customer service and processing centers, including a USPS remote encoding center, 985 employees, and Infonix, 950 employees, and others. So the official Wichita Area Economic Development Agency proclaims the existence of a company that no longer exists in Wichita and claims a job count that the company never achieved. This is beyond careless negligence. This is malpractice. And it's not just one mistake like this. The USPS remote encoding center that we mentioned, it's being closed this year. Now, in his State of the City address for 2013, the Wichita mayor lamented the fact that Wichita has no dedicated funding source for economic development. Now, I think it's likely that Wichitans will be asked to approve increased taxes for economic development, as well as for many other things that we want, like a new central library, new water and sewer pipes, improved public transit, and more downtown development. But before Wichita officials ask for more taxes so that there can be more spending, they need to convince us that they care about managing and measuring results. They haven't shown this so far. Well, we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Let's have Amanda BillyRock illustrate another chapter of the book Economics in One Lesson for us. This is Chapter 10, titled The Fetish of Full Employment.
It is human nature and a fact of life that we seek maximum results for minimum effort. Think about it. If you were offered $100 to work 10 hours, or $100 to work 5 hours, or the equivalent of 1 Bitcoin, which would you choose? The latter, of course. Why? The former gave you 10 units of production per hour of your effort, and the latter gave you 20 units of production per hour of your effort. So it's not that you wanted maximum employment of hours, it's that you wanted maximum production. Why do we even go to work to begin with? It's to be able to buy things to improve our quality of life, like food, homes, cars, bicycles, shoes, Nintendo Wiis, baby strollers, socks, phones, frying pans, bags, shampoo, refrigerators, books, computers, medicine. And not just products, but services, like tutoring, foot massages, computer repair, dry cleaning, dance lessons, web design, truck driving, babysitting, haircutting, accounting, mentoring, and carpentry. The higher our production, the better our quality of life. 100% employment does not necessarily equal prosperity. In fact, quite the opposite. You know, North Korea has almost 100% employment. On the contrary, the fewer the people who have to work, the better off a society is. For example, children, the elderly, moms or dads who want to stay home to raise their kids. When they don't have to work, everybody's better off. In fact, what if one day robots or machines usher in an age of 100% unemployment and are able to do everything that we used to have to do? Hello, hallelujah, break out the margaritas.
We saw in the previous segment of today's show that politicians are concerned with creating jobs, and I suppose that jobs are okay as a goal. But what we should really value is production and prosperity. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we could have everything we want without having to work for it? But here's what Henry Hazlitt wrote that illustrates how employment alone, that is, employment for its own sake, is not really a good goal. He wrote, "Primitive tribes are naked and wretchedly fed and housed, but they do not suffer from unemployment. China and India are incomparably poorer than ourselves, but the main trouble from which they suffer is primitive production methods, which is both a cause and consequence of a shortage of capital and not from unemployment. Nothing is easier to achieve than full employment once it is divorced from the goal of full production and taken as an end in itself. Hitler provided full employment with a huge armament program. The war provided full employment for every nation involved. The slave labor in Germany had full employment. Prisons and chain gangs have full employment. Coercion can always provide full employment." Well, we have to remember that Henry Hazlitt was writing right after World War II, so that's some of those references there. So jobs are great. I think that everyone who wants a job or needs a job should have one, and a fulfilling one at that. But jobs alone should not be the ultimate goal of our economy. Hazlitt tells us that the progress of civilization has meant the reduction of employment, not its increase. He reminds us that because of our wealth, children do not have to work as they once did, and most old people don't have to work either. It's important to recognize the role of government and economic freedom in creating an environment that allows production and prosperity to flourish. Here's an example. Consider Germany not long ago split into two countries, East and West Germany. Then look at the automobiles that each country created. East Germany is famous for something called the Trabant. John Stossel has shown this car on his TV show several times. It has a two-stroke motor that produces 26 horsepower and belches smoke. It doesn't work very well at all, and you had to wait a long time to get one in East Germany. Then look at the cars that West Germany created at the same time: Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Porsche, and Volkswagen. These two countries were formed from the same people with the same culture. The difference was the government. One country was a totalitarian state with a centrally planned economy, while the other was relatively free. Or consider Korea. After its partitioning some 60 years ago, a huge difference developed between the two countries. In North Korea, there's hunger, concentration camps, and forced labor. South Korea, on the other hand, gave us Gangnam Style, the first YouTube video to be viewed 1 billion times. And in 1957, South Korea had a lower per capita gross domestic product than did the country of Ghana, but by 2008, its GDP was 17 times as high as Ghana's. Government makes a great deal of difference in allowing people to flourish. And differences in local governments are apparent too. Here's a chart of the growth in gross domestic product showing Wichita, the country as a whole, and our visioneering peer cities such as Oklahoma, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City. So where's Wichita? Well, it's the bottom line. We're in last place. If I showed you a chart of job growth, it would look pretty much the same. Wichita would still be in last place. So what's the difference between Wichita, Tulsa, and Omaha? Well, it's not the wonderful weather year-round, it's not the mountains, and it's not the ocean. Lack of these things is the usual reason we're told that Wichita can't grow as fast as other areas of the country. And what about the people in these three cities? I don't know, but I'd say that the people in Wichita, Tulsa, and Omaha are pretty much the same. There must be some other reason why these areas are growing so much faster than Wichita. I would look to our governments first. This is important, too, because these differences are more than just academic curiosity. They mean a lower standard of living for us in Wichita as compared to what's possible with other nearby cities. I wish I could leave you on a more positive note concerning the future of Wichita, but I can't. In my opinion, we in Wichita are not serious about having a discussion about our future. We can't even get our leaders, both political and bureaucratic, to be truthful with us about the state of the Wichita economy. If you showed the mayor and city council a chart comparing Wichita to our peers, as I recently did at a city council meeting, you might be criticized for spurious reasons not related to the chart. That's what happened to me anyway. And when our Economic Development Agency presented its annual report earlier this year, it was made clear that these benchmark figures would not be presented. Until we are truthful with ourselves, no matter how unpleasant that may be, I don't think we'll be able to recognize our problems and figure out the solutions. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.